Okay, you're asked to construct the graph of y equals f of x equals x to the p, where y factor is 3/2. We should know what that means by now. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to start with an x value out here. I'm going to cut that in half. 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 I could probably go another half, but the y point is going to get a little bunched up, so I'm not going to do that. And now I'm going to work backwards on this graph. I could start by marking a point here and moving across in the way we've done previously, but I'm going to say, okay, let's just be careful. This point is above this point, drawing this little projection line, this dotted line here, to make sure this point is pretty much directly above this one. Now, I come to half the x value. Well, the value here, whatever this value is, whatever the y value is here, 3/2 of that value needs to be equal to this y value, meaning that this y value has to be 2/3 of the y value you get here. So if I come down to 2/3, that's about 2/3. I'm going to say that that puts us about here. And come down to 2/3 here, I'm going to say, okay, that puts us about here. Come down to 2/3 of that, that's going to put us about here. Come down to 2/3 of that, it's going to put us about here. From before, I know that 0, 0 is a point on the graph. You don't want to get too colorful on you, but I'll go ahead now and use orange chalk to sketch the curve. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, you're asked then to label this graph to represent the curve, the x to the p curve, except it's not going to be x to the p. It's going to represent a curve where y equals 4 when x equals 1. So we're going to have to label the point 4, 1. Now if we read a little further ahead on the question as asked, you're going to be asked to estimate f of 3. Well, that means you don't want to put 1 way out here, because then x equals 3 is going to appear off of the graph. So I don't want my x equals 1 point to be more than 1/3 of this distance. So I'm going to put my 1, 1 point, about here. That's kind of close to the way we made it look, and it's not the 1, 1 point, it's the 1, 4 point. So now we have the point 1, 4. Now clearly, if the point 1, 4 is on this graph, it's not a graph of just plain old x to the p. So what do? Well, we say that, okay, now y is 4 when x equals 1, and x to the 1, well, saying that wrong. X equals 1 implies x to the p equals 1 to the p equals 1. So it turns out that y then has to equal a generalized power function a x to the p. And when since y equals 4 when x equals 1, we conclude that 4 has to equal a times x to the 1. And then we can solve for a. Sorry, it's not x to the 1, it's 1 to the p. And it doesn't matter what the value of p is. We find that 1 to the p being 1, a has to equal 4. So our function is y equals 4x to the p. Now that's just a little extra. You weren't really asked to do that, but that's something I'm kind of adding here, and it's worth knowing. Okay, now we're asked in the problem as stated to evaluate or estimate f of 2. So let's see, if this is a 0.14, then we'd have 1 here, and we have 4 here. Well, if 1 is here, then 2 is twice that far, and 3 is that far again, and 4 is that far again. So here we've got, let's say, 2, 3, 4. I don't think I've spaced those exactly right, and you probably won't either. You're not going to get it exact, but hopefully you do a little better than I did. Okay, well, let's go ahead and label the y-axis in multiples of 4. If that's 4, then that's going to be 8, and then another 4 is going to get us up here to 12. Now you can do better than I did, especially if you use a compass and straight edge, although that's not required, but you still want to be careful. Then I'll mark my divisions of the intervals of 4 so that each of these little marks corresponds to 1. Now if I want to estimate f of 2, and I'm looking for the red chalk, okay. So I'm going to estimate f of 2. If I make a good, honest estimate, it looks like what? There's 4, there's 5, there's 6. I'm going to say it's about 5.6. So I'm going to say that f of 2 is approximately 5.6. f of 3, am I getting it right? I don't know. Got a bad angle to look at this board from. There's my honest estimate. I think that looks like about 7.8. So my estimate is f of 3 is about 7.8. Haven't done any calculations. I've just made measurements. So what's f of 3 minus f of 2? Well, let me draw just another little picture over here. Okay, here's 2, here's 3, here's my curve. I'm just kind of slopping this down. This is not very accurate. But I'm going to say that this is about 5.6. This is about 7.8. Okay, so this is f of 3. This is f of 2. Now I could subtract to get f of 3 minus f of 2, but I don't want you to do any calculations. So we're just going to go down to this graph here. Now from my f of 2 point to my f of 3 point, looks like there's a distance of 1, 2 marks, and I estimated this as being a little closer to 8 than this was to 6. So I'm going to say, well, that's about it's going to turn out to be 2.2. That's going to be this distance here, and I don't have a good place to mark that. So I'm going to say, that this distance here then is f of 3 minus f of 2. And I'm just going to say it's approximately equal to 2, just estimating from the way it looks on the graph. But you might estimate 2.1 or 2.2 or 2.3. Of course, with these numbers, you know it's 2.2 if you take my original estimates. Okay? Now, the solutions to f of x equals 1 and f of x equals 10. Well, I'm running out of colors here, but let's just go with a little bit of purple. Should have left myself a little more room here. I didn't, so we're going to live with it. F of x equals 1. Let's see. First, I'm going to draw it over here. Let's just say we wanted to find the solution to f of x equals 4. Okay, so if 4 is here, then Here is the solution. F of x equals 4. The value of x for which f of x equals 4. That's what we mean by the solution. Now you're asked the solution for x equals 1, the solution for f of x equals 1, the solution for f of x equals 10. You've got to do the same thing. And if you see what to do, you should go ahead and do it and don't pay any attention to what I'm doing. But here we go. Now if I go to this graph, here's 1. If I move over here and down here, it puts me a little bit to the left of this mark, but of course this mark doesn't mean anything on the scale. It's just the mark I used in constructing the graph. Okay, I've got to estimate how far this is. Well, it looks like that's about a quarter of the way from here to here, doesn't it? Maybe 0.2. So I'm going to estimate that this is, and I haven't left myself a good bit of room, I'm going to put 0.2 here with a question mark. Is that x value 0.2? Well, that's my estimate. So I'll say that f of x equals 1 when x is approximately 0.2. Now what about f of x equals 10? Well, here's 10, halfway between 8 and 12. Now I've got a little more room here. I can actually come over to the graph, then come straight down. I could extend my scale of this graph a little bit. Here's 4. Let's say maybe here's 5. Probably made that a little bit too small, but I'm going to say that according to the way I located 5 there, which is probably a little too narrow, it's probably about 4.6. If I put 5 where it belongs, it'd probably be 4.5. But now we'll say .6 with a big question mark. So f of x equals 10 when x is approximately 4.6. Now your estimates should be better than mine because I slopped all this thing down and I wasn't all that careful and my scale is not all that uniform. If you made a good careful graph, excuse me, you might have obtained better estimates. Now there is a way to check. Okay, so we can check all this. For a perfectly constructed graph, we know that P is log to the base 2 of 1.5. Okay, now there's one more thing you were asked to check. Estimate f of 8 divided by f of 2. Now, I don't have very good color coding here. F of 8 be about here. Okay. I'm sorry, that's completely wrong. Okay. F of 8 is going to be a little further out here, so you would have to extend your graph out to 8. And if we come up to here, I'm going to say that f of 8 probably should be about, get the right color, I'm going to say about 12, just eyeballing it. And f of 2 looks to be about Of course, I estimated that already to be 5.6. So, f of 8, f of 2, that comes out close to 2, doesn't it? But not exactly. See what you got.